Maria Eagle is the Labour MP for Garston and Halewood, and she joins us on the programme. Maria Eagle, what's your reaction then to this announcement that schools won't be expected to open to all children before the end of term now?
Well, I can't say it's tremendously surprising. The head teachers that I've been speaking to locally have all had concerns about whether they have enough classrooms and staff to have all the pupils back. And that's even if they feel safe in other ways. With the social distancing that's now required, many school premises simply aren't big enough, and there aren't enough staff to deal with the extra capacity that's needed to have much smaller class sizes. So there were some real practical issues. And we still haven't heard what the Secretary of State is going to say. He's making a statement to Parliament in the next hour or so. So we only know what has been said reported in the newspapers so far. So we don't precisely know what he's going to say. But I must say, I think if he is going to accept that there's a more complex issue than they originally thought, then I think that's probably a welcome thing.
And what about moving forward? Because for parents who may be expected, for example, to go back to work in shops, which could be reopening next week, and then looking ahead to September, if things are still as they are now, there's big questions then, aren't there, for how schools will operate? I suppose there's more time between now and September to get classrooms or school rotas ready. But are you convinced that there is, the thinking is being done, that, plans are being worked on now that could see some more children return later in the year?
Well, I'm not convinced that the government are thinking very clearly. I think from the start, the schools, the head teachers, staff, and those who go into schools regularly, who local MPs have been talking to and having meetings with, virtual meetings obviously, have raised these concerns. And the government have simply said, oh, well, it'll all be fine, we'll have smaller class sizes. They don't seem to have taken into account some of the real practical considerations. A small school only has a certain number of classrooms. You can't magic them up out of nowhere. And at least they're now engaging with this, I suppose, which is good. But I think certainly in South Liverpool, what's been coming back at me from parents and from teachers, head teachers, is safety is the most important thing. There are obviously then big concerns about how families who are going back to work, where parents are going back to work, what are they then going to do if the kids aren't back at school? And that is a real issue. And it's not one that we've got an answer to from the government yet.
Now, this week has seen the Black Lives Matter protests across the country and in Liverpool. And there's been a discussion, in the last few days. I mean, obviously, there's been a discussion for decades, but it's been particularly focused on in the last few days about how Liverpool should address its past links with slavery. What's your view?
Well, I think these things do have to be addressed. Liverpool isn't that different to Bristol in terms of its history in this respect. And I know that there have been initiatives in the past about things like street names, streets being named after people who made their money in the slave trade. There are various ways in which you can deal with it. You can either rename the streets, and there's a process to be gone through where that can happen locally, or you can promote better understanding of the person whose the street is named after and set it in context. You can have more. I'm all for more and better public art that addresses the issue of, who should be a valued citizen at any time in a local community. And so I think that one of the things that these protests are bringing very sharply into public focus is how we address the past and some of the people who we've honoured in the past in our city. When we can see these days in more modern times quite how disgraceful some of what they did was. I think that there is a real live issue about that now, and I think it is time for us to get it higher up the list of priorities about how we tackle it. I'm sure that will happen in Liverpool.
Now, you've been back in the House of Commons. You've just asked a question in Justice Questions not that long ago, within the last hour. What's it like being back?
Well, it's a bit strange. The chamber, with only 50 MPs maximum in it, is not like it was. It's much harder to heckle without being caught at it, shall we say. And it changes the atmosphere completely. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think there's pros and cons. It is, however, deeply frustrating as a member of the House of Commons who's used to being able to go in whenever I want to go in. You have to now apply. You can only go into the chamber if your name is drawn out, if you apply to go in and your name is drawn out. So, for example, I'm not going to be able to go in and listen to what Gavin Williamson says about schools because my name hasn't come up on the call list, although I did apply to be in the chamber at that time. And that is deeply frustrating, actually.
Yeah.
So it's strange. I think whilst the social distancing measures are in place, it's going to stay strange. It does enable us to do some scrutiny of the government, but it's nowhere near what it was in terms of our capacity to hold them to account in various ways. And of course, at the moment, there's so much happening that we will really want to talk to them about and hold them to account about. My own view is the government have been very poor at dealing with huge aspects of this crisis. And there's nothing we'd like more than to get in there and ask them about it and put pressure on them and have debates. We simply can't do it because we're not allowed in. So it's very frustrating in many ways, although, of course, it's good to see some return to normality.
And finally, and very briefly, we've heard on Radio Merseyside concerns over the future of zoos, and we've heard a lot about Chester Zoo, but Knowsley Safari Park is in a neighbouring constituency to yours, and presumably you're very concerned about its future.
Well, the government have just said that it can't reopen, even though by nature it's a drive-through socially distanced experience. And it's just this a stupid decision, and this just illustrates what I was saying about how we need to hold them to account. There's a debate on Thursday, which I'm hoping to pop into and make the point, but the government needs to change their approach to zoos and to safari parks and let them reopen with some of the other shops that they're planning on reopening and businesses in the next couple of weeks. There's no reason why the safari park, and Chester Zoo for that matter, can't reopen. They've all done the work to make sure that they should be able to open safely, and that should be allowed.